What if everything you were taught about the ancient world, the rise of empires, the birth of writing, the dawn of trade, is actually the second attempt? What if humanity already built all of that once before, and then lost it almost completely in the span of a single human lifetime? Here is what almost nobody talks about. Around 1200 BC, something happened. Not in one place, not to one culture, but to every advanced civilization on Earth, simultaneously. The Mycenaean Greeks vanished. The Hittite Empire, one of the most powerful military forces in the ancient world, collapsed overnight. The Egyptian New Kingdom nearly ceased to exist. Ugarit, the wealthiest trading city on the Mediterranean, burned to the ground and was never rebuilt. Cyprus, Canaan, Babylon, all of them destabilized within the same 50-year window. No single conqueror did this. No single drought. No single disease. And here is the part that should stop you cold. Historians still cannot fully explain how it happened. You are about to find out what they do know, and it will change how you see everything that came after. You might be thinking, okay, civilizations collapse, that happens. Why does this matter now? Here is why. The Bronze Age collapse around 1177 BC is not just a historical footnote. It is the single greatest systems failure in human history, and understanding it means understanding something deeply unsettling. That advanced, interconnected, prosperous societies can disappear faster than anyone inside them could have imagined. The people living in Ugarit in 1200 BC were not primitive. They had international trade networks stretching from Egypt to Afghanistan. They had a written language. They had diplomats, merchants, architects, and a middle class. Sound familiar? The collapse did not just kill kings, it erased literacy in Greece for 400 years. 400 years where nobody could read or write because the knowledge simply died with the people who held it. The reason this matters to you right now is simple. Almost every assumption you have about how civilization works, how stable it is, how resilient it is, was formed without knowing this story. That changes today. Let's start with what we can actually see in the archaeological record. Beginning around 1250 BC and accelerating sharply after 1200 BC, site after site across the eastern Mediterranean shows the same signature: destruction layers, thick bands of ash and charred debris buried under centuries of dirt. Archaeologists call these destruction horizons, and finding one at a single site is significant. Finding them at dozens of major sites across multiple countries within the same geological time frame is extraordinary. Mycenae, Tiryns, Medea in Greece, all burned. Hattusa, the Hittite capital in modern Turkey, burned and abandoned so completely that it was never reoccupied. Megiddo in Canaan, destroyed. Lachish, destroyed. The palace at Enkomi on Cyprus, destroyed. And then there is Ugarit. In 1929, French archaeologists excavating the site found something that made them stop cold. In the ruins of the royal palace, they found a clay tablet that had never been fired, meaning it was still in the kiln being baked when the city fell. The message on it was a desperate plea from the king of Ugarit to the king of Cyprus. It read, "Enemy ships have come. They have been setting fire to my cities." That letter was never sent, because Ugarit was gone within weeks. So who did this? For over a century, historians pointed to one answer: the Sea Peoples. Ancient Egyptian records, particularly from the reign of Ramesses III around 1177 BC, describe massive waves of seafaring raiders striking from the north. The inscriptions at Medinet Habu, the mortuary temple of Ramesses III, show vivid carved reliefs of naval battles and land invasions. The Egyptians described these groups with names like the Peliset, the Cheker, the Shekelesh, and the Weshesh. Some historians believe the Peliset eventually became the biblical Philistines. Egypt fought them off, barely. But the Sea Peoples theory, while partially true, has a serious problem. It explains the destruction but not the origin. Because here is the question nobody could answer for decades: where did the Sea Peoples come from? They appeared suddenly in enormous numbers, carrying women and children with them, suggesting they were not raiders, but refugees. Entire displaced populations moving in desperation. But displaced from where? And displaced by what? This is where the investigation gets genuinely strange. Because when researchers started examining the evidence more carefully, a different picture began to emerge. One that was not about a single enemy at all. Archaeologist Eric Klein, in his groundbreaking research, proposed something that was controversial when he first suggested it and is now widely accepted among scholars. The Bronze Age collapse was not caused by one thing. It was caused by everything at once. Think of it like this. The late Bronze Age world was the first truly globalized economy in human history. Egypt exported grain. The Hittites exported iron and silver. Cyprus exported copper. Canaan exported timber and dye. Mycenaean Greece exported pottery and olive oil. Everyone depended on everyone else. And that interconnection, the very thing that made them powerful, made them catastrophically fragile. Now layer on top of that network a series of simultaneous stressors. Climate data extracted from pollen samples and tree rings shows a prolonged drought beginning around 1200 BC that struck the eastern Mediterranean hard. Grain prices in Egypt spiked. Food became scarce. Then add internal rebellions. Egyptian texts from this period describe worker strikes. The first recorded labor strike in history happened in 1170 BC when tomb workers at Deir el-Medina stopped working because they had not been paid in grain for 2 months. Add earthquake storms. Seismologists have identified a cluster of major earthquakes striking the region between 1225 and 1175 BC, hitting Mycenae, Tiryns, and sites across the Aegean. Then the Sea Peoples arrived into a system already fracturing at every joint. It was not a war, it was a cascade failure. And when the trade networks snapped, the specialized economies that depended on them had nothing left to fall back on. Here is what most history content never tells you about this event, and it is the part that genuinely should give you pause. The collapse was not just physical, it was psychological. When the palace systems fell, they took with them the entire administrative infrastructure of Bronze Age society. In Mycenaean Greece, writing, linear B script, existed solely to serve palace bureaucracies. When the palaces burned, nobody maintained the writing system. There was no one left to teach it. Within a generation, an entire civilization forgot how to write. For 400 years, Greece entered what historians call the Greek Dark Ages, a period with almost no monumental architecture, no written records, dramatically reduced. So let's bring this all together, because when you step back and look at the full picture, what you are seeing is something that feels uncomfortably familiar. An interconnected global system at the height of its sophistication. Trade networks so efficient and specialized that individual regions could no longer survive without them. Climate stress building slowly in the background while leaders focused on short-term threats. Population movements driven by desperation rather than aggression. And then, when the first domino fell, whether it was drought, earthquake, internal rebellion, or the arrival of displaced peoples, the system had no redundancy left. It could not absorb the shock. Every node in the network that failed put more pressure on the remaining nodes until the whole thing came apart faster than anyone could have predicted or prepared for. The scholars who study this period, people like Eric Klein, Brandon Drake, Brandon Urie, Now if this story has gotten under your skin the way it gets under mine, if you are sitting there thinking about interconnected systems and cascade failures and civilizations that forgot how to read, then I want to point you to the single best resource I have found on this entire subject. Eric Klein's book, 1177 BC, The Year Civilization Collapsed, is genuinely one of the most important history books written in the last 20 years. Klein is an archaeologist who has spent decades excavating Bronze Age sites, and the book reads like a thriller while being meticulously sourced. It takes everything we covered today and goes 10 layers deeper. If you have Audible, this is the book I would queue up next. The narration is excellent, and it is exactly the kind of thing you listen to on a long drive and then cannot stop thinking about for weeks. I'll link it below. The knowledge in that book is the kind of knowledge that makes you understand not just where we came from, but how fragile the thing we built actually is. And there is something quietly powerful about knowing that, about understanding that civilization is not a destination. It is a practice, one that has already been interrupted once and rebuilt from almost nothing, by people who had no idea what came before them. We started this video with a question. What if the history you were taught was actually the second attempt? And now you know the answer. It was. The world you live in, the alphabet you read, the democratic ideals that shape your politics, All of it came after a collapse so total that the people who survived it did not even know what they had lost. They just started over, and they built something that lasted. If this hit you the way it hits most people who discover it for the first time, share this video with someone who thinks they know ancient history, because I promise you, they do not know this part. Subscribe if you want more stories that history class skipped over, and drop in the comments. What part of this shocked you the most? I read everyone. The link to Eric Klein's 1177 BC on Audible is in the description below. Disclaimer. This video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing constitutes professional advice of any kind.